Hello, class. It's Miss Roberts here, and today we're going to begin by talking about why should we study argument. Being this class about argumentation, we explore subjects such as communication, critical thinking, how to present arguments, and how to formulate them. So I like to think of it as a public speaking 2.0, if that makes sense. But before we dive into the skill sets you're going to learn this semester, let's go ahead and dive into why is this class a thing in the first place. Let's begin. All right. So let's explore the concept of post-truth. When we think about discourse in online spaces, the news, your barbershop, where you guys talk about over lunch, discourse about social events, current events are everywhere. But when we think about how conversations about the world happen, it doesn't happen in a bubble anymore. Think about life before social media. For many of us, we're like, before social media, what do you mean? But for those of us who were adults during the social media boom and now the AI boom, the world looked pretty different. So, for example, if there was a current event or a social concern that we had, a lot of those conversations happened in our own communities or in our own friend groups and our own enclaves. But now, with increased technology and the ability to share our opinions and voices all over the world, now we can create content and share and learn about different opinions from all over the place, which is wonderful. These technological advances have broken down some of the gatekeepers of communication, if that makes sense. But that some other issues or some ethical issues popped up. So the concept of post-truth comes from the switch from objective facts being more important than emotion. Now, if you think about whether it be persuasion class or public speaking class or any other critical thinking class, we have the concept of ethos, logos, pathos, our rhetorical appeals, where we have logos, which we have our logical conclusions that come from what we communicate. Ethos, the trustworthiness of the presenter, but then there's pathos. So, what are some of the emotional appeals that we're making when we communicate our thoughts and our arguments? All three, when balanced and used effectively, can be effective in persuasion and argumentation. But because I'm thinking about algorithm incentives and financial incentives to be more sensational with communication, we also have to think about it that way and the motivations of the speaker as well. So unlike maybe more traditional mainstream news sources where objectivity is built into the journalism field and part of their core ethics, social media in general doesn't necessarily have those rules. So as consumers of content, we have to make sure to put on our critical thinking hats and think about, okay, what is the content I'm consuming? What is the source? And if it's based on current events or something that I'm learning, what other steps I need to take to make sure that I'm getting accurate information. So we are communicating in this post-truth world. So let me go ahead and change the slides here. Well, in the previous slide, I mentioned critical thinking. So what is critical thinking? It is a continuous process, and critical thinking, especially now with the explosion of AI content, social media, and just being able to get so much information at once from so many different places, using critical thought and critical thinking is more important than ever. So when we're thinking about critical thinking as an overall broad skill set, by having increased critical thinking skills, we're able to understand course content, especially in class like this, where we're going to be talking about thinking all the time. philosophy classes, ethics classes based on your major definitely explores these realms as well. But in general, in the classes that I both taught and took, there's usually at least one chapter that either focuses on ethics and critical thinking or they weave it in throughout the semester. So you can't be in a place of learning or an active learning without using those critical thinking skills because it's about how you process information and make use of the logic that you're learning. But in addition, it also, or developing your critical thinking skills also provides more productive disagreements and less verbal aggression. So whether it be an in-person class or in-person context, if we're in a hybrid situation or if we're in a solely online class, we are going to be exploring not only the content of the messages, but the emotions of the pathos behind the messages. Emotion is important. So there are times where we lean on those emotional pills to win the argument, excuse me, but to increase our chances of our argument going well. But sometimes if you lean too much or put an emotion where it's not warranted, then it can take away from our argument and maybe our logic. So one of those examples could be verbal aggression. So some topics we're very passionate about, and I always encourage us to take the subject that we're passionate about and make sure that we're balancing our emotions with developing the arguments and things like that. So it's all about a balancing act. So by using critical thinking, we're able to separate our emotions and strategically learn how to put those or insert those emotions within our arguments and our presentations. But we also have informed decision making skills, problem solving skills, which is very important. Think about decisions that we make every day, decisions as consumers, decisions as students, decisions as consumers of content, making sure that we use the information that we learn in order to solve problems in our lives. So by developing our critical thinking skills, taking a pause before acting, we are able, to be better citizens. And then finally, the ability to innovate. So you've heard of the adage, necessity is the mother of invention. So you might come up with an idea that hasn't been even thought of yet, or you might contribute to discourse and contribute a thought or an idea that we're like, I didn't think about that. So being engaged in critical thought helps us innovate and problem solve in new ways. So, like I said before, being able to construct your argument, balance those rhetorical appeals, ethos, logos, pathos, and putting your ideas together is a part of the communication process, public speaking process, and argumentation process. But we want to make sure that we're civil when talking to each other. And with the ability to communicate with many people, you are communicating with people who might not have the same code of ethics as you do. So when we think about that, many of us believe there is a civility issue or problem in discourse. Little side note, that is my cat Katrina back there. She's probably one of three cats you're gonna see. There's my cat Jasmine in the back there, but she's white, so she blends in the background. So they're gonna pop up because for those of us who have cats, they just show up whenever you want them to. So just alert if you see another like white orange one that pops up, that's my cat Ash. They're gonna be making appearances. It's class. So everyone, now back to what I'm talking about. Okay, so sometimes the lack of civility in discourse, people might not pay attention to politics or pay attention to those issues, not because they don't care about them, but the energy or vibe behind these conversations might be overwhelming. And if that's what happened to you, or you've been doom scrolling, things like that, make sure to take a mental health break and try to balance being informed without being sucked into some of that negativity. Political polarization is at an all-time high, and that can kind of spill into the rest of society. So think about any hot button issues that people care about that might be divisive issues. There might be divisive issues at the dinner table, and you might have an opinion about one side of the argument, and someone you know or your relative might have another opinion. How does that affect relationships? But that's just something to think about, not only as a communicator, but as a thought in this class. How do we agree to disagree or discuss important issues while keeping that respect with one another? So, whether it be online or in person, I want you to think about civility of online discussion, and can civil discourse be had in an online space? Why or why not? So, depending if we're the hybrid or the completely online course, sorry, I want you to think about, hey, what does that civility look like? What are your own rules for how you engage in online discourse? Have you ever had an argument online? And what are your rules for online discourse? So, does social media contribute to a lack of civility? Because, of course, just like any tool, it's only as good and it's only as effective as the people who use it. So, human beings are perfect, we're fallible. So, what are some of our not so great tendencies that spill over into use of these tools? So first we have echo chambers. It's a space that surrounds us with similar attitudes as our own. So for example, um, during a political season, I remember when I used to engage with Facebook a lot, I would get information that reflected my own political beliefs, which is cool. It's good to have community. But if I wanted a balanced or opposing viewpoint, just so I know all sides of an issue, I wouldn't find it in my own social media feed. The way that social media works is that you get more of the algorithm the more you engage in a certain topic. So in order for me to kind of break that mode, I have to purposefully find information that is opposite of what my existing political beliefs are. So sometimes we might engage with social media, and that same social media feed will give us the same information, which is fine. Community is great, but make sure if you're trying to find both sides of the issue to actually seek out the opposing viewpoints. And then we have the online disinhibition effect. Because people can remain anonymous online, they will conduct themselves in ways they wouldn't in person. So, for example, have you ever had someone say that to my face? And of course, they wouldn't, because saying inflammatory content in people's faces can be inflammatory and it has different consequences. So, because there's this sense of safety online, it may encourage people to say or express themselves disrespectfully in ways that they wouldn't in person. So that contributes to lack of civility online. Just people being anonymous, being able to say whatever they want, and they aren't good stewards of that privilege. But then there's deliberative democracy. Discussion is foundational to the democratic process, and it's good that we have opposing viewpoints and able to see all the options on the table as far as discourse. But sometimes if we're passionate about a topic, we have to be careful to also be respectful of our philosophical opponent, and be careful of or be aware of how we come off and be respectful. And of course, we will want someone to do the same thing for us. So, what are some strategies for reviving civil discourse? Seeking new and alternative perspectives. Like I said before, for me to break out of the echo chamber, I have to seek out content that's the opposite. And I might even agree with that opposing viewpoint, but at least I'm aware of what they are so I can avoid that echo chamber of ideas. Encourage this constructive dialogue. So, of course, you can't you can't control the world, right? For example, if you ever seen like online beefs, or you might have seen someone with an online audience address the audience as far as like, you're talking about me, I'm going to defend myself. To me, I understand why people do it, but it's very hard to do because I can't fight the world with my words, right? So the only person I can control is myself. What information and what content and what comments am I sharing with the world? So it's almost kind of like you have to block the negativity, but be a part of the constructive dialogue, be a part of the constructive discourse, even if you disagree, make sure to the best of your ability. Because, for example, with typing, some context can be lost in typing, so just be aware of that. However, be the nuance and be the change that you want to see in essence, right? And then increase information quality. So, this being the summer of 2025 is an interesting summer as both an instructor of communication, an instructor of argumentation, and a consumer of, well, yeah, consumer of online content, and a burgeoning consumer of AI, because all these worlds are merging for some reason. So, for example, with the increases of AI, there's AI content that's out there. And sometimes it's funny, but sometimes it's really offensive. Sometimes you can tell it's AI, and sometimes you're like, oh, that's AI. So, in addition to social media as its own little place, now we're throwing AI videos and content in the mix. So now we have to discern, is this real or not real? And what messages and information is coming out there? And is that information helpful? So there's an extra layer. So if you're seeing this sometime in the future or future years, I'm gonna have to do a little update to see how this goes. But in the summer 2025, we are not only dealing with mainstream media and some of those messages, social media discourse, and all of the conversations there, but now AI is thrown into the mix. So it's a very exciting, interesting, weird, and concerning time. But I'm excited to see how it all goes. So when I say increased information quality, it could be overwhelming because there's just so much out there. Don't get overwhelmed. Take a break. Don't be chronicling online. But just put that, just excuse me, just consider this as part of your critical thinking skill set toolbox, as far as like, okay, here is mainstream media, here is online discourse, here's our understanding of what conversations are out there, here's AI, how is this developing. Be overwhelming at times. And this is a person that does this for a living and talks about these things for a living. Don't get overwhelmed. Bite-sized pieces of information, and just be aware and develop as the times develop. All right, so we have ethics and argument as well. So when we think about ethics, it's the study of what's the right the right and wrong in human behavior. So for example, ideal arguments are collaborative dialogues. Dialogue should be free from coercion, manipulation, competition, and domination. So some of the things that we talked about earlier, as far as putting our best face forward, or to put our best selves forward when we're engaging in discourse. And although you can't control others, you can also control yourself and control what you do and be the example that you want to see out there. So now that we learned about the state of online discourse, civility, and ethics, how will you behave more ethically while engaging in discussions? So we're going to talk about this, whether it be online in the classroom. I look forward to hearing about it. See you soon. Thank you so much for joining me and my cats to think about and talk about talk about why do we study argument. We study argument because argument is all around us, whether it be in person, at the coffee table, at the dinner table, the barbershop, online. Arguments made by traditional media. So Let me know if you have any questions about the content, and I will see you later. All right. Bye, class.